tangle with other ideas. So rehabilitation may reduce actual crimes, for example, where they could save himself from another motive to commit a crime, education, and but actually it provides a kind of opportunity to gain a job or to be employed, and rehabilitation can also be consulted in a probation system and kind of a familial consultation. And many psychologists could come to help. Education public. And you also point of consideration about classification of crimes. There are two classes of crimes in the American legal system, felonies and misdemeanors. Felonies are generally punishable by death or imprisonment for more than 1 year. Other crimes are misdemeanors. And it is a central concept to organize other kind of provisions. So a felony would be prerequisite. Though we could to incorporate in another element of crime others. And vagueness and other constitutional limitations and interpretations of criminal statutes would be one of subject you have to tackle in criminal law course in this department. So you will learn basic principles. For example, if ambiguities arise, the interpretation should not be stricter against the violence, criminal actors. So, and what is the evidence rule beyond reasonable doubt and rule of lenity? You will see criminal statutes are construed strictly in favor of defendants if two statutes address the same subject matter but dictate different conclusions. The more specific statute will be applied rather than the more general. The more recently enacted statute will control an older statute. So later in time rule is principle, generally over a scope of legal subjects, and especially important in terms of a criminal act or a criminal statute. So it is fairly miscarriage of justice when you apply a retroactive depth of criminal law and criminal statute. So ex post facto laws is a classic notion that we generally hold through the practice of liberal constitution. And under new comprehensive codes, crimes committed prior to the effective date of new code are subject to prosecution and punishment under the law as it existed at the time the offense was committed. So perhaps you will recall the complicated discourse about the application of criminal acts, some basic provisions, but could pose challenges in the various aspects in specific cases. Generally, the state that had jurisdiction of a crime, as I've said, any act constituting an element of the offense was committed in the state. An act outside the state caused a result in the state. The crime involved the neglect of duty imposed by the law of state. There was an attempt of conspiracy outside the state plus an act inside the state, or there was an attempt of conspiracy inside the state to commit an offense outside the state. So consider in analogy the territorial principle in the international law. Of course, the kind of a jurisdictional question is generally resolved in granting the jurisdiction generously. Okay? So we have some extent of leniency in granting the jurisdictional competence, especially in terms of criminal laws. Nonetheless, basically, we see elements to involve the competence of jurisdiction in specific state or others. Lotte principle would be applied. The place of criminal act, the place of a result from the criminal act, and the kind of many elements to be related with the criminal act. So various grounds to find legitimate jurisdiction, and we will call the law statute in the context of a civil litigation. You will have ample perspective and very generous to grant criminal jurisdiction. And the universal context of criminal jurisdiction is now discussed, even in Korea and others. The first-time jurisdiction will be applied to cases when we take in international play in concern of this issue. So, for example, victims could be kind of ground to exercise national jurisdiction. For example, consider the killer is a foreigner, but the victim killed is Korean. Then we could have very ground to exercise criminal jurisdiction against the crime, and also take a reversed illustration. So the criminals may be Korean, and the victim will be foreign. And also the criminals and victims would have no venue to be attributed in the kind of criminal elements. So they have no point to invoke the kind of a general theory on territoriality or impersonal concern. It's still be possible that the Korean authority could exercise criminal jurisdiction. So kind of a protectionism would come in focus in deliberation. So you will apply the criminal provision to protect the criminal interest envisaged by the less equal. So, for example, the Korean currency being forfeited, counterfeited by foreigners, and there will be no victim of Korean origin. Still, the Korean government could assert a very jurisdictional competence since the national interest has been infringed. Kind of value concern, protection of criminal interest could be an element to create the very jurisdiction. And also, in extreme cases, we will find jurisdiction in terms of universalism. There is no national or criminal interest to be involved, and no personal and territoriality ground could be elicited in the case. Instead, the Korean government could share compassion and collaborate to deliver criminal justice to the criminals. The kind of a marginal concept would be instructed into criminal laws. And of course, we now have a striking feelings of atrocities about some crimes, very limited scope of crimes, categorized to offend the basic international value, or war crimes, or kind of crimes against humanity, will now be responded by international criminal court. We have a treaty about organization of international criminal court, and perhaps have provisions delineated to authorize the kind of a criminal authorities. Of course, the membership is larger, except for some cases. Especially, it is not unexpectable to the United States lead the conclusion of a treaty, negotiation conclusion of treaty. Nonetheless, in final stage, they drop the option reasons. Of course, we consider sources of criminal law. There is no federal common law of crimes. All federal crimes are statutory. The majority of states retain common law crimes. The modern trend is to abolish common law crimes either expressly by statute or implied by the enactment of comprehensive criminal codes. So you now learn the merger rule, and I once mentioned the catch-up phrase in terms of a criminal enactment. So the legislation would often stipulate catch-up clause to merge all the rest of a common law crime. So they generally tend to stipulate the criminal statute, and that would also come in conflict with modern criminal theory. Without law, there is no punishment. In this case, law generally is understood as the kind of a statute, kind of political resolution of an assembly body.